Ladies and gentlemen, fire up your monocles, oil your mustaches, and buckle up your leather belts, because today we're diving headfirst into the most aristocratic machine ever to snarl at the English countryside. It's fast, it's furious, and it smells like cigar smoke and tweed. That's right, today we're talking about the Brough Superior SS100, a motorcycle so exclusive, even the Queen's corgis couldn't chase one down. Now, before we rip through this tale of chrome and horsepower, let me ask you to kindly hit that subscribe button. Because without your support, Timmy's garage goes quiet, and we'd much rather keep the engines running and the stories roaring. So join the Tiny Wheels gang and help us keep the throttle twisted and the legends alive. Right then, let's rewind the crank to 1924. The First World War was behind us. Flapper dresses were in, and people were finally replacing their trench shovels with petrol dreams. Enter George Brough, a man who looked at motorcycles and thought, why can't these greasy beasts be more like a Rolls-Royce? And I believe that's exactly what he set out to do. Build the Rolls-Royce of motorcycles. He even got permission from Rolls-Royce themselves to use the phrase, so you know he meant business. George was not just the owner of Brough Superior, he was the brains, the moustache, and the ego behind it all. Alongside him was engineer Harold Carslake, who handled the numbers, while a mechanic named Ike Webb physically assembled the prototype, affectionately called the shop bike. The Brough Superior SS100 rolled onto the scene in 1925, and let me tell you, it didn't roll quietly. The goal? To sell motorcycles to the upper crust, aristocrats, writers, racers, and the kind of men who wore goggles at lunch. The world was roaring into the 1920s, and the SS100 was ready to lead the parade, with champagne in the fuel tank. Production wasn't mass market, it was artisanal. Brough personally oversaw the assembly of each motorcycle, not once but twice. That's right, George would build them, disassemble them, paint them, and reassemble them just to make sure they met his impossibly high standards. In 1925, they built just 69 of them, each priced at £170. Considering the average mechanic made around £3 per week back then, the SS100 wasn't so much a motorcycle as it was a mobile aristocrat badge. And what did you get for that cash? Oh, just one of the most powerful motorcycles on the road. The original engine was a 998 cubic centimeter, 60.9 cubic inch, V-twin with overhead valves built by J.A. Prestwich, better known as Jap, which I believe sounds like something Bob would mumble into a walkie-talkie at 3 a.m. It produced around 45 horsepower at 5,000 revolutions per minute, which may not sound monstrous today, but in 1925 that was like strapping a rocket to your butler. Transmission came courtesy of Sturmey Archer, a 3-speed gearbox with a hand lever slung under the seat. Shifting required a bit of planning, a firm grip, and ideally no potholes. It had a duplex cradle frame made of steel tubes, co-developed with racer Herbert Levac, and a front suspension called the Castle Fork, a modified Harley-Davidson design that Brough claimed as his own, just like every guy on the internet who says he invented air frying. The rear end? Well, originally it was rigid, because who needs spinal discs anyway? But starting in 1928, Brough added a spring-mounted saddle and eventually an actual rear suspension. The brakes were drum-type, with a 5-inch front unit that was slightly more effective than dragging your feet. It had 19-inch wheels with skinny tires, a wheelbase of about 60 inches, 1,524 millimeters, and weighed around 340 pounds or 154 kilograms if you measure your regrets in metric. Fuel? It had a 2.5-gallon, roughly 9.5 liters. Petrol tank and a separate 1-quart, 0.95-litre oil tank, because the engine used a total loss lubrication system, a fancy way of saying it leaks on purpose. And yes, the top speed was certified at 100 miles per hour, 160 kilometers per hour. Each bike came with a certificate proving it had actually hit that speed in testing. That's right, folks, your bike got a diploma before you did. But Timmy, was it really that special? Oh, absolutely. Unlike most other manufacturers who slapped together parts and hoped for the best, Brough cherry-picked only the finest components: Jap engines, Sturmey Archer transmissions, Brooks saddles, Royal Enfield rims. The man was the original boutique builder, and he didn't just ride on reputation, he raced. George and his team, including legends like F.P. Dixon and Levac himself, dominated events like the International 6 Days Trial, scooping up gold medals and proving that this bike wasn't just a gentleman's plaything, it could conquer mountains. There were constant upgrades. By 1934, the Alpine Grand Sports variant came with a 75-horsepower Jap engine, dual magnetos, and an oil pump. In 1935, they added hand-shift levers, and by 1936, hold on to your monocle, they switched to a 4-speed Norton gearbox. This wasn't just a motorcycle anymore. It was a constantly evolving, high-speed work of art. Design-wise, the Brough Superior SS100 didn't just look fast, it looked expensive. Long, low, and lean with a narrow waist and a purposeful tank, it had the kind of silhouette that made even parked bicycles feel underdressed. The bike had an aura of hand-built refinement that screamed, "I eat velocettes for breakfast." But there was purpose in all that style. The tank was shaped for hugging with your knees, the footrests and handlebars were positioned for control at high speed, and the rear was designed to make you look good riding away from peasants. Even the lettering was classy. SS100. It didn't stand for super speed or scary stuff, but it might as well have, because this thing could outrun your mortgage and your first 3 marriages. When you parked an SS100 outside a cafe in the 1930s, people didn't ask what it cost. They asked if you owned land. It was more than a machine. It was a signal, a statement, like wearing a monocle to a pub. And George made sure of it. His clientele included everyone from actors to aristocrats. Even George Bernard Shaw rode one, presumably while debating socialism with a pigeon. And then there's T.E. Lawrence, yes, Lawrence of Arabia. He bought his first Brough in 1925 and would go on to own several more, naming each one Boanerges. He once called the SS100 the most thrilling thing in my life. He also tragically died on one in 1935, swerving to avoid 2 boys on bicycles. But out of his death came something world-changing. The attending surgeon, Hugh Cairns, was so shaken that he dedicated his life to studying head trauma, eventually helping to push through the widespread adoption of motorcycle helmets. So technically, the SS100 helped save lives after it took one. Now let's talk money, because even aristocrats need numbers. Back in 1925, one SS100 would run you £170. That's about £12,200 in modern cash, or $15,400. By 1927, you could snag a Pendine racing version for £160, just slightly less expensive, assuming you didn't mind your spleen vibrating out of your ribcage. Fast forward to the modern day, and oh boy, the collectors have opened their wallets and sold their lesser organs. In 2019, a 1930s SS100 sold for a jaw-dropping £425,500, roughly $540,000 or €490,000. Before that, the record was £315,100, set in 2014. Even as recently as 2023, one fetched £241,500, about $300,000. Not bad for a 2-wheeled beast, originally built in a Nottingham shed with tools that probably still had coal dust on them. So what makes the SS100 so beloved? The SS100 was fast, luxurious, hand-built, and gorgeous. It was, and remains, one of the most beautiful bikes ever made. Not because it tried to be flashy, but because it tried to be perfect. Now, if this story tickled your carburetors and revved your funny bone, don't forget to subscribe to Timmy Tiny Wheels. We've got more old machines, more tales of glory, and yes, more rants about Bob's obsession with AI-possessed kettles.